I think the art of writing well is something wonderful to know. And even if you aren't going to become a writer, it's wonderful to have all through your life.
A message to children who have read this book. When you grow up and have children of your own, do please remember something important. A stodgy parent is no fun at all. What a child wants and deserves is a parent who is sparky.
Roald Dahl must have been a great dad. He put this gypsy caravan in the garden for his children to play in, and it was this caravan that gave him the idea for Danny's home in Danny, the Champion of the World.
Long before they were ever turned into books, Roald Dahl would tell many of his stories to his children at bedtime. And one of their favourites was the Big Friendly Giant. Then, just as they were falling asleep, he would sneak outside and blow dreams in through their bedroom window, just like the BFG.
Dahl often said that if he hadn't become a successful writer, he'd have loved to have been an inventor. He was always experimenting with something or other.
Once, he bought a new pair of shoes, but they turned out to be a little tight. So, he filled a plastic bag full of water, put the bag in the shoes, then put the shoes in the freezer. Now, he knew that when water freezes, it expands, so it would stretch his shoes until they fit, and it was a success.
Another thing that Dahl used to do was to make small hot air balloons using tissue paper, and then he'd let them go, and him and his children would watch them as they disappeared into the night. Just like in Danny, Champion of the World.
We held the sides of the balloon out as much as possible to keep them away from the flame in the early stages. But soon the hot air filled the balloon and the danger was over. "She's nearly ready," my father said. "Can you feel her floating?" "Yes," I said. "Yes, shall we let go?" "Not yet. Wait a bit longer. Wait until she's tugging to fly away." "She's tugging now," I said. "Right," he cried. "Let her go." Slowly, majestically, and in absolute silence, our wonderful balloon began to rise up into the night sky.
Roald Dahl's children said that their dad made everything seem like an adventure.
For him, a walk in the countryside was more like a treasure hunt. He'd be the first to spot an interestingly shaped stone or a piece of pottery.
And he was always making up stories about the things he saw around him, like this amazing old tree.
On a hill above the valley, there was a wood. In the wood, there was a huge tree. Under the tree, there was a hole. In the hole lived Mr. Fox and Mrs. Fox and their 4 small foxes. Every evening, as soon as it got dark, Mr. Fox would say to Mrs. Fox, "Well, my darling, what shall it be this time? A plump chicken from Boggis, a duck or a goose from Bunce, or a nice turkey from Bean?" And when Mrs. Fox had told him what she wanted, Mr. Fox would creep down into the valley in the darkness of the night and help himself.
In Roald Dahl's hut, right next to the seat he used to sit in when he was writing, there's this table full of knickknacks. Now, all these things were important to him, like this model of a Hawker Hurricane, the aircraft he flew during the Second World War. Or this, which is actually Roald Dahl's hip bone. It was replaced with an artificial one in an operation, and he kept the real one as a paperweight. And this. It looks like it's made out of lead, and yes, it is very heavy, but it is in fact hundreds and hundreds of the wrappers from chocolate bars.
I've got a bit to go before I catch up with him. Dahl loved sweets and chocolate all his life. In fact, he had a giant jar of them at his bedside permanently, and of course they were always cropping up in his stories.
Especially in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh, they're mine, you didn't even ask! Get off!
"Choose a button," said Mr. Wonka. "The 2 children may press 1 button each, so take your pick, hurry up. In every room something delicious and wonderful is being made." Quickly, Charlie started reading some of the labels alongside the buttons. "The Rock Candy Mine, 10,000 feet deep. it said on one. Coconut ice skating rinks, it said on another. Then strawberry juice water pistols, toffee apple trees for planting out in your garden, all sizes, exploding sweets for your enemies, luminous lollies for eating in bed at night, rainbow drops, suck them and you can spit in 6 different colours.
Roald Dahl grew up in Llandaff in Cardiff in South Wales, and one of his earliest memories, at about 7 years old, was of a sweet shop which was the centre of his universe. But to enjoy the pleasures of this shop, he had to endure the horrors of the old lady who ran the place.
Her name was Mrs. Pratchett. She was a small, skinny old hag with a moustache on her upper lip and a mouth as sour as a green gooseberry. She never smiled. She never welcomed us when we went in. And the only times when she spoke were when she said things like, "I'm watching you, so keep your thieving fingers off them chocolates." But by far the most loathsome thing about Mrs. Pratchett was the filth that clung around her. Her apron was grey and greasy. Her blouse had bits of breakfast all over it, toast crumbs and tea stains and splotches of dried egg yolk.
Mrs. Pratchett, the inspiration for many of Dahl's nasty characters.
Yeah, like George's horrible grandmother in George's Marvellous Medicine.
Or Mrs. Twit in The Twits.
Or all the witches who plan to entice the children of the world to their doom.
Each of you will be buying for herself a sweet shop. You will be buying the very best and most respectable sweet shops in Inkland. We will,
they answered. Their dreadful voices were like a chorus of dentist drills, all grinding away together. One foolish witch got so excited at the possibilities presented by owning a sweet shop that she leapt to her feet and shouted,
"The children will come flocking to my shop, and I will feed them poison sweets and poison chocks and wipe them all out like weasels!"
Adults who hate children are everywhere in Dahl's books, and they were everywhere in his life as well, especially when he was a schoolboy.
Thanks, can I just... Sorry about that. Thank you. Excuse me, sorry. Can I just... Right, thank you. Dahl went to 3 schools in all. Here he is. And at each school, he was beaten by the masters with a cane. Excuse me, can I just... Sorry. Thank you. I'm really sorry. Thank you. Now, at this school, St. Peter's, there was a rather nasty character called Captain Hardcastle. There he is. Now, he crops up as Captain Lancaster in Danny, the Champion of the World. Now, Captain Lancaster thrashes Danny just as Dahl was beaten in every school he went to.
The long white cane went up high in the air and came down on my hand with a crack like a rifle going off. I heard the crack first, and about 2 seconds later I felt the pain. Never had I felt a pain such as that in my whole life. It was as though someone were pressing a red-hot poker against my palm and holding it there. I managed not to cry out loud, but I couldn't keep the tears from pouring down my cheeks.
It's freezing in there. Well, here's Dahl with some of the other Dahl children. He had very fond memories of his childhood. He used to go on really happy family holidays to Norway. He was Norwegian by birth, and he spoke Norwegian, and most of his relatives were Norwegian, and so was one of the main characters in The Witches.
My grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians know all about witches, for Norway, with its black forests and icy mountains, is where the first witches came from.
Dahl moved here to Gypsy House in 1954 and then he stayed here all his life.
And it was here he dreamed up all the stories for his children's books.
The first children's book I wrote, which was about 26 years ago, James and the Giant Peach, I had a kind of fascination with the thought that an apple, there's a lot of apple trees around here, and fruit trees, and you can watch them through the summer growing bigger and bigger, from tiny little apples to bigger ones and bigger. And it seemed to me an obvious thought. I mean, what would happen if it didn't stop growing? Why should it stop growing at a certain size? And this appealed to me. I thought that was quite a nice little idea. And then I said, which fruit shall I take for my story? And I thought apple, pear, plum, peach is rather nice. It's a lovely fruit, and it's pretty, and it's big, and it's squishy, and you can go into it, and it's got a big seed in the middle, which you can play with. And so the story started. It starts always with a tiny little seed of an idea. I quickly write it down so that I won't forget it, because it disappears otherwise, rather like a dream.
And he wrote everything down in these exercise books.
He might not write down a whole idea, just a sentence or a question or a snippet of conversation.
Or maybe just a word he thought up, like grobble squirt.
Here's one of the earliest entries. It says, what about a chocolate factory that makes fantastic and marvellous things with a crazy man running it? Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Now, he'd also jot down interesting facts he came across, like number of heartbeats per minute. Horses, 40. Cats 150, hedgehogs 300, pigs and humans 70, and mice 650. Now, which story did that come from?
Oh, hang on, I know the answer to that. Hang on a minute, it's
Roald Dahl strongly believed that all good writing was actually rewriting. He originally wrote 314 pages for The Giraffe, the Pelly and Me, but they only ended up using 34 of them.
When Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was first written, the Oompa Loompas were called the Whipple Scrumpets, and Mike TV, he was called Herpes Trout, and there were 15 children in it.
And then he gave it to his little nephew to read, and he said,
It's rotten, Uncle Roald. I don't like it at all.
So, Roald Dahl started all over again. Twists and turns are an important part of any plot, and Dahl was always on the lookout for new ideas which would make his stories that little bit more interesting.
Now, he got his ideas from facts and figures, or photographs, or memories from his childhood, or simply from the sights and sounds of the surrounding countryside.
Roald Dahl kept his eyes and his ears open for new ideas at all times.
And he always encouraged young people to do the same.
He built this maze for his children in his garden, and at the entrance there's an inscription which says, "Watch with glittering eyes the whole world around you, because the greatest secrets are always hidden in the most unlikely places. Those who don't believe in magic will never find it." The witches!
No, it's the Minpins. That's the bit from the end of the Minpins,
No,
isn't it?
no, I don't mean the inscription. No, I mean that fact about a heartbeat that you said earlier on. It's from the witches.
Is it?
Yeah. You know the bit where the boys turned into a mouse?
When you're writing, it's rather like going on a very long walk across valleys and mountains and things, and you get the first view of what you see and you write it down. Then you walk a bit further, maybe up onto the top of a hill, and you look down and you see something else, and you write that. The highest mountain on the walk is obviously the end of the book, because it's got to be the best view of all.